There are three types of costs when you're calculating UBI that are important. There's the gross cost, the net cost, and opportunity cost. The first idea is take the entire population and multiply it by the UBI. So this is pretty simple, and this is what everybody, when they talk about UBI, or usually they point out this cost, even though it's the most misleading of all the versions of calculating UBI. This is what almost everybody looks at when they say, oh, UBI is very expensive, because all they're doing is they're taking the UBI multiplied by the entire population, which is for the net cost, it's the amount of money redistributed under UBI, removing those that return the entirety or a portion of their basic income through taxes. So what that means is that depending on how it's implemented, you have a portion of your UBI over time that is returned to the government through tax. So when we talk about, okay, the rich are also getting a UBI, I think it's important to remember that they're actually really not. They're losing money under a UBI. When you calculate this, you look at you predict how much money is redistributed. So the total amount of money that goes from the people that are wealthier through taxes, and that's shifted back to people that are lower in income brackets. So the way that you can calculate this is you have the UBI amount multiplied by family size, so this is a family, minus the family income times their UBI taxes. So for an individual, it's UBI minus their income times their market income, times their taxes for the UBI. The reality is that a lot of people will break even. They won't get much from the UBI. A lot of people will pay into the UBI. So that is the direct foregone opportunities or used resources due to implementing UBI. That would be the administrative cost and the deadweight loss from taxation. And there's only two real opportunity costs, the actual resources that are used to implement UBI that are thus foregone are these two areas. And UBI is really good on this part and might be really bad on this part. So here you can see after the tax is implemented, the supply curve shifts to the left. And there's two gray boxes here represent the part of the deadweight loss. So in a sense, it's the surplus that's foregone because of government intervention. On the administration component, UBI is probably the most efficient, least likely to have 机会成本 on the 行政方面. The problem is that it's one of the highest deadweight loss related policies that you could implement because the gross cost is so large. So you have to have all these taxes that are used to redistribute those money. And so that's when they talk about the gross cost mattering, it does matter because that money is taxed from one person to give back to that same person. So there's some efficiency loss in that process, but you gain in administrative savings. So to calculate whether or not UBI is truly cheaper than current welfare systems, you have to take into account both of those things. Okay, so the last part, we were talking about the universality of basic income and why do we want to give it to rich people. The first thing that we'll look at is how officials determine if you can get the deval. It's actually quite difficult to assess because in the instance of China, they're very strict that rich people should not get deval. But the irony is that rich people get the deval than poor people in China. It also has a strange effect of discouraging people from trying to invest in themselves because part of the conditions to prove if you're wealthy or not is if you have a phone, if you have internet, if you are sending your child to a nice school. These are all things that can make you lose the deval. The other component is that it's stigmatized recipients. It also keeps them in poverty because once they're labeled as people that are in poverty, it isolates them from other people in the community. So then they're less likely to rise out of poverty since they don't make connections with people, they can't mobilize themselves, they can't get jobs. So the interesting thing about having a poverty-targeted program is that everybody in that program thinks they are a poor person. The other problem is that with the conditions, only 10% of poor people in rural areas receive. In the 6 largest cities, it wasn't that much better. 21% of poor people actually get the DBAL. The World Bank study found that only 1 to 2.4 of the money spent on the DBAL reached the poor. The other interesting thing is when you think about this part, a lot of this money is spent on the administration because in order to prove that somebody's in poverty, you have to spend a lot of money to go and do those investigations. So the next part will be Julia.
We'll talk about another one of the big criticisms. So basically, like the main critique is if people had UBI, then they will not work. Maybe 1-2% of the people might chill and go to the beach. And so to address the question of work, we really have to ask the question of what is work and the difference between work and labor. So 说与劳动的差异，meaning 不一样。所以劳动是你换就是你的时间，然后你拿到一个薪水，它有交换的价值，因为你才换的是你的时间，你的人民的时间，为了拿到一个薪水。Work, there are many different types of, and it's important to separate work and labor in order to fancy. If you have a UBI and your relationship to your 老板 changes, your ability to produce different forms of work and labor will change. Basically, like the wages paid for like comfortable types of labor would decrease. About hard labor jobs, the wages for will either go up, as people will say no, or they will get automated, right? If they're easily 自动化. That's basically it. And now James is going to talk about inflation.
So one criticism that's levied against universal basic income is that it could increase inflation. So my goal in this presentation is to explain why that may or may not be the case. So my 4 main points are that taxes reduce the demand. It might mobilize unused resources. Third, we would have less inflation related to specific items as compared to other welfare policies that target. And lastly, I'll argue that suppliers adjust, which more or less mitigates a lot of the effects of it. Okay, so it's a circular flow diagram of the economy, where everything goes. So the reason why this is really important to a discussion on inflation is because inflation is a measure in a sense of how liquid the circulation of money in the economy is. So this is a supply and demand curve. When the supply of money expands, the value of money goes down. So this is the value of money. This can also stand for interest rates. But inflation actually occurs naturally in an economy and is to some degree a good thing because as there's economic growth, there is actually more demand for money. People needed more to buy goods is a good way to think about it. So as an economy grows, demand for money increases, which naturally pushes up the value of money. But in this case, we're not actually talking about creating money because, first of all, it's largely just taxes is how this is going to be funded. This money is just being moved from one spot in the economy to another spot in the economy. These taxes actually lower the demand for some goods. So the total demand in the economy remains about the same, but the demand for different types of goods changes because of redistributing money. Here's how there's actually adjustment. Businesses adjust to increase demand. For example, they'll increase supply. 2 other options that we might look at suggesting in our policy proposal is just indexing the universal basic income to inflation. In light of that, if we were to simply index the universal basic income to inflation, that would eliminate any concern for the low-income people that are actually receiving the basic income. We can also index it to productivity. Productivity has been increasing in developed countries, but wages have been pretty stagnant. One idea would just be to say, as productivity in the economy increases, as a single worker is able to get more done with technology, the universal basic income is going to increase. The philosophical idea behind indexing the productivity is that workers should share in the increase fruits of their labor.